Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to return to a brewery that has featured on the channel many times before. This must be the kind of 50th or so review that I've done from these guys. Had a lot of nice beers from them over the years, but they are a very well respected Swedish brewery and probably one of the best known ones worldwide actually. But the beer we're going to have a look at today is a slightly different sub-style than what we're used to from these guys, and I have to say I am quite curious to see how it turns out. So for this one then, we are going to head up towards Gothenburg once again. Göteborg, as you would say in Swedish, the Swedish craft beer capital up there on the west coast. Got to get that Gothenburg catchphrase in when we're reviewing Gothenburg beers because it is just channel tradition. And for this review, we are going to return to Stigbergets Bryggeri. So this particular beer is called Syndafloden. It comes in at 6% ABV, and this one is a Kveik IPA. So yeah, really curious to see what this beer has in store for us. Kveik yeast, of course, comes from Voss up in Norway, and it's basically an old Norwegian farmhouse yeast. It's quite a high attenuating yeast, and it gives you a lot of really nice kind of fruity characters actually, as well as being, you know, it's got a really distinctive kind of almost bready, yeasty, kind of just doughy type thing actually. So yeah, it's a really interesting yeast actually, and I think this is the first beer I've had from Stigbergets that uses a Kveik yeast. So really curious to see what this one has in store for us. So this beer was released as part of the Tillfällig temporary assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden. I want to say that the release date was the 16th of February. I think it was the 16th of February actually. So yeah, I'm reviewing this beer after I've had it in the fridge for about a week, so it should hopefully be nice and fresh, but I think it would be, considering that Gothenburg isn't too far away. But yeah, really curious to see how this one turns out. Always nice to try new beers from Stigbergets, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this beer as well. So let's see how we get on then. So as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Stigbergets Bryggeri before, and you will no doubt see more from these guys in the fairly near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you're interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Stigbergets Bryggeri then, on to my brewery notes. So Stigbergets Bryggeri, as I've told you many a time before, are based in Gothenburg, Göteborg up on the Swedish west coast, and the company was founded by Nils Hultkrantz and Richard Simonsson, and the pair own two bars that share the one kitchen, the Bar Kino and the Hagabyons Cafe, both of which can be found on Linnegatan in the city, and they opened back in 2007, and this building is actually an independent cinema, which I didn't know until I actually went to visit it. And if you're curious to have a look, you can take a look at my out and about video, which, if I remember rightly, was filmed in October or so of 2019, so make sure you check out that. But originally the idea that they had was to brew a few beers that they could sell in the bars, but this led to them kegging the beers and then selling them to other pubs, and eventually to bottling them, which began in November of 2014. The original beers that they were producing were mainly English and German styles, and they've started kind of producing a few of those as well, more recently as well. But in more kind of recent times, if you like, the thing that really kind of kicked off this brewery's fame was when they focused on the more hoppy American beers. The original head brewer was Ole Anderson, who is the co-owner of OO Brewing. He remained the Stigbergets head brewer until April of 2017, I want to say, and he created the really well-known beers from these guys. The GBG Beer Week beer of 2016, now known as the new and improved GBG Beer Week, and also the Amazing Haze, which is one, you know, those two beers are the cult classics, or two of the cult classics of the Swedish New England hazy IPAs, along with OO's Narangi, and I guess you could say the New Sweden IPA from Opie Gourds as well. He also made beers such as the Muddle and a few other things too. But he was replaced for a period of time after that by Barnaby Struve, who was one of the vice presidents at Three Floyds in Munster in Indiana over in the States, quite close to Chicago. But as I say, that was just a very kind of temporary measure. But a little bit later on, the brewery moved to Party Halarna in the city, where they were brewing 5,000 litre batches at a time. And while they were in this brewery, they started brewing a little bit of sour beer as well. But they started selling their beers soon after that in these 440ml milliliter cans instead of the 330 bottles that they were using before, and this has allowed them to export their beers a lot more widely, and you can find these beers, you know, fairly easily across the European continent these days. I'm not sure if they've made it over to North America or a little bit further east out to Asia and things. I honestly couldn't tell you. But these days they've got a brew team of Ollie Banks, who used to work for Beavertown in London, and also Lucas Monraid, who used to work for All In Brewing, one of the numerous breweries operating in one of the numerous gypsy breweries operating in the Gothenburg area. But as of summer 2020, they've moved into a new brewery at Ringen, and they're apparently thinking about brewing some lambic beer as well. And they're saying that the whole idea behind this new facility they have is to be a kind of experience brewery. So they're talking about having swimming facilities there and having a bar and things like that. So, you know, fingers crossed we can get something like that. We can have a look at that at some stage, and I would love to interview Niels and Richard on the channel at some point. That would be really cool. The next time I go up to Gothenburg, I need to drop them an email and see if we can arrange that. It'd be cool to have those guys on the channel for a Meet the Brewery segment. In April of 2020, they opened up a bar in Stockholm, and they've also recently opened up their own Folköl shop in Gothenburg as well, actually. For those of you watching outside of Sweden, Folköl is beer that is beer, I think, yeah, basically beer and other things that are 3.5% and below. If it's above 3.5%, it has to be sold, can't speak in this review, it has to be sold in the state-owned alcohol shops known as Systembolaget. But yeah, as of February 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced in the region of 100 different kinds of beer, according to Untappd. Their main focus is the kind of hazy New England IPA style, but they do produce various other things as well. And in recent times, they have been diversifying a little bit. They did release a West Coast IPA and a black IPA in recent times, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a hold of those, sadly. But I do hope that at some stage I can find those to look at. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Stigbergets Bryggeri for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website, you can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can of course check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's have a look at this one then and see how we get on. I'll just let you have a little look at the artwork before we open this one up. As I said earlier, this one is called the Syndafloden, which literally translates as the flood into English. But if you actually look at the construction of the word, as I've been learning in my Swedish classes recently, Synda is like sin, and flood is like flodden is like river. So it basically means like the sin river, essentially, as well, if you break down this word. So yeah, it must be some kind of reference to Christianity when the world was naughty in the eyes of the magic man in the sky. But yeah, as you can see, there's the Stigbergets Bryggeri symbol. The artwork is very nice as always, and it's it's a different artist on this one, I think, Neil Paling. So yeah, the artist for this one is actually different, but yeah, quite a common theme on these Stigbergets beers is the seagull. And I always complain about this, you know, having lived in Aberdeen in Scotland for 4 years where there was genetically modified seagulls. I hate them. Sky rats. Don't like them. But yeah, they do make for nice artwork. I will give that to Stigbergets. But yeah, 440ml can, this beer. Once again, this was about 45 Swedish kroners if I remember rightly. So €4.50, £4 sterling, roughly $5 American for those of you watching in different places. But yeah, let's get this guy out and we will get on with the taste. And then very curious to see what this beer has in store for us. A 6.2, a 6% Kveik IPA. Yes. Oh, bit of an aggressive pour there, but what can you do? Yeah, there we are. So, yeah, nice looking beer, I have to say. We can see from the can there. Yeah. You can smell some of the fruit off this as well. I was just wondering if there is any sediment there. Looking to pour the last little bit of it in there. Why not? There we go. And yeah, no sediment on the bottom of the can. There we are. Normally I would leave a little bit, but I just kind of thought, why not? The thing about the Kveik IPAs is you do want, personally I think you do want the yeast in these because, you know, it's a Kveik IPA. It's a yeast forward IPA, this one. So yeah, it looks like a lovely, lovely beer. You can see that when this beer poured, it had a finger of, I would say it's kind of a bit frothy at the bottom, but it's actually quite a bumpy head on this one. So you can see that with this beer. You can see it's really nice and bumpy. The level of haze on this for a 6%er is pretty damn impressive as well. That's definitely one of the superior and gloopier IPAs that you're going to come across at 6% ABV. So it does look pretty impressive. But yeah, in terms of colour, I would describe this one as a kind of mixed tropical fruit juice. I always like comparing these kind of hazy type IPAs to different kinds of fruit juice, because that's just really what their appearance reminds me of. But yeah, there's one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of the head there, and I mean overall it does look pretty damn nice. And you can see, if I put my fingers behind the glass there, you can see the level of haze on this thing. I just want to check on the can actually and see, does this have oats and wheat and things like that in it as well? Just barley malt and oats actually. So yeah, that's interesting. Interesting with this one. Let me just check that that's aligned there. There we go. Yeah, still getting used to this new camera and aligning the cans up and stuff properly when I move them around. But yeah, lovely looking beer. This one, mixed kind of tropical fruit juice appearance. And you know, these Kveik IPAs do tend to be big hazy things actually. I've been noticing that quite a few breweries have been brewing, you know, Kveik double IPAs actually. That has become a little bit of a popular style in recent times. I think I reviewed one from Russia fairly recently, come to think of it. But yeah, some awesome beers in Russia incidentally. But yeah, let's take a closer look at the aroma of this one and see how we get on. Nothing particularly surprising about this beer in terms of its appearance when you consider what style it is. So let's take a look at it. The aroma, that's pretty nice, I have to say. So yeah, obviously you're getting a lot of yeasty character out of this one for sure. You know, straight away with this beer, you can smell a little bit of a sort of woodiness to the beer. It's got a nice kind of grainy sort of quality to it. It's a little bit sort of crackery as well. I do remember these Kveik yeast being like quite woody and, you know, grainy and crackery, and you do get quite a bit of that out of this in the baseline of the beer. You definitely get a good bit of a kind of white bready character. There's also a nice kind of bread crusty thing in there as well, which I do like. Yeah, it's interesting how all of that goes together. It's got a lovely yeah, it's got a lovely kind of just backbone to it. It's quite, these Kveik yeasts, as I say, are quite different. So yeah, a bit of woody character, a little bit of a kind of, you know, Jacob's cream cracker. I don't actually know if you get those in Sweden, come to think of, but it's got a little bit of a kind of cream crackery sort of backbone to it. There's some really nice kind of white bready notes in there. It's got a little bit of a kind of bread crusty quality as well, and then you can definitely smell some of the kind of oaty notes coming out of this beer as well. You can smell just a bit of the thickness from the oats in there. There is a wee tiny touch of like a, you know, a Werther's Original kind of butter candy type thing out of the beer. You do get that wee bit of sweetness if you take the aroma in quite deeply, and yeah, it does go together. It does go together really nicely actually. I mean, I very much like how the aroma of this beer pieces itself together. So the other thing you're going to notice about the yeasty characters is that it does give you a good little bit of fruit, and I mean, you are going to get, you can smell like some yeasty sort of, you can smell a little bit of a sort of pineapple-y, apricot papaya type thing, and that's from the yeast in this beer. Kveik yeast always gives you a little bit of these kind of very soft tropical fruits, papayas, apricots, and then just a wee touch of a kind of more juicy pineapple-y quality, and you get that straight away in this beer. Because and the way you can smell it is it smells like the bread, the sort of bready notes you get out of the beer is a wee bit fruity, or the bready notes I should say are getting terrible with that these days. Yeah. Oh, my English is deteriorating these days as I learn more and more Swedish. It's terrible. But yeah, the malty side of this beer, the malty and yeasty qualities that you get out of this beer, I think, are very, very nice. I'd be curious to know what barley malts they've put in this one. You know, is it a bit of pale malt? Is there a wee touch of like, you know, a kind of Cara Munich or something like that in here? Cara Munich seems like a little touch of that could be logical for this one. Golden Promise would be another logical one as well, in fairness, or a bit of Maris Otter, something like that. Because the more you smell of it, you do get a wee bit of a McVitie's digestive biscuity kind of thing out of the beer as well. But yeah, I mean, as you would expect with a Kveik IPA, it is very yeast forward and very kind of, there's a good malty presence in there as well. But on the hoppy side of things, there's a wee soft earthiness to it. There is a little bit of that. Yeah, there's a nice sort of soft earthiness to the beer. I do appreciate that about this beer. Yeah, it does have just that wee touch of earthiness to it, and that will partially be from the yeast as well. But you've got a nice bit of a kind of floral, aromatic sort of thing going on with this one. There's a nice little bit of a lighter grassy quality to the beer as well, but the hops are not too prominent in the aroma of this beer, in fairness. But on the fruity side of things, as I said, you get a bit of that pineapple-y, apricot-y, papaya type thing out of it. And for me, there's a wee bit of an orangey note on this one. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a bit of mosaic in here. I wouldn't be surprised about that, because it does have a nice little orangey hint to it. And it's a softer orangey kind of tangerine, which makes me think, yeah, maybe mosaic. Could also be Amarillo, in fairness, because there are one or two little oily elements to it. But I'm more leaning towards saying it's mosaic. You know, pardon me, there's so many hops out there these days that that it could be. The other one it could be would be Azaka, and Azaka would actually be a very nice hop in these Kveik IPAs, because it's got a bit of pineapple which would complement the yeast, but it's also got a really nice kind of sharper mandarin-y orange as well. So, you know, it could even be that, I don't know, but I find that from the hoppy side of things, because you can smell the difference in the oily notes between the fruity, the yeasty fruits and the hoppy fruits. You can smell the difference, I think. But there is definitely a bit of a kind of oily orangey character coming out of this one, and maybe there's a wee hint of a slightly stronger passion fruit or something in there from the hops as well, but I think it's more orangey and citrusy, to be honest with you. So take a wee bit of time. I think that sums up the aroma pretty nicely, to be honest with you. Take a little bit of time and ponder the aroma over, but I think it's about time that we had a taste of this beer, and I'm curious to see what it's like. So yeah, let's go for it then. So this one is the Syndafloden, a 6% Kveik IPA, released as part of the Tillfällig assortment here in Sweden through Systembolaget from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Gothenburg on the Swedish west coast. Let's get stuck in. Slange, skål, cheers. Yeah, that's a nice IPA, I have to say. What I would say about this one is that it's actually, first impression is that it comes across as very smooth and drinkable in a lot of ways. Yeah, so it's really nice and smooth and drinkable, and it's just the yeasty notes, I think, just come across really nicely. In some ways, some of the vibes that you get out of the yeast in this, it's almost kind of similar to if you add one of these more pungent tropical fruits into the beer, and you get a wee bit of that. It's almost like it's almost like a little bit of that. The way that grapefruit is kind of pungent, it's almost like that, and you get a wee bit of that at the back of the palate in this beer. It's almost like you've got a wee bit of a grapefruity pungency on the very back third of your tongue with this one. So that's a really interesting point to make about this beer. The way that everything fits together in this one, I think, is quite unique and quite interesting. But yeah, it does get a thumbs up from me. This it's quite different to what I've had from Stigbergets in recent times, but it's just, you know, it's just as good, I would say. It is just as good. So yeah, this beer gets a thumbs up from me. Absolutely. Yeah. Where to start with this one then? Where to start? Right. So straight away with this beer then, you can feel a nice little bit of a kind of pale bready, malty sort of thing. You can feel a bit of that pale malty quality just going right across the middle of the palate there. But then on top of that, on the back third of your palate and in the middle third of your palate, you know, on top of that pale malty thing, it's the yeast that really kind of dominates in there. You can feel that as you progress further into the aftertaste, you get a few kind of woody flavours coming out of the beer. There's a little bit of a kind of crackery thing in there as well, which I think is very nice. So yeah, there is a really nice little kind of crackery vibe to the beer as well, which I think goes together, which I do think kind of pieces together very nicely in this beer. Absolutely. So yeah, on the back third of your palate, as I say, I think if you go to that border region between middle third and back third of your palate, there is definitely a bit of a bread crusty, grainy sort of thing to the beer, 100%. But yeah, in front of that, you get a bit of a kind of grainy, it's almost like it's got a little bit of a kind of brown bready, grainy sort of thing in there. And on top of that, you've got a wee bit of that sort of cream crackery type vibe. But then the thicker yeasty components of the beer are kind of sitting on top of this. And it's almost like a thick bready note, but it's not quite, white bread. It's not quite wholemeal bread. It's quite difficult to place exactly what it is. But yeah, on the back third of your palate, the thing is, underneath that, there's a slightly more kind of stronger, a stronger grainy type quality there, and you can feel that the thickness of the yeasty qualities on that back third of the beer are a little bit more, or just a little bit thicker as well. And if you kind of go above that, as I was saying, in that border region, there's a bit of bread crusty note. If you go higher up than that, you can feel there is a wee bit of that sort of grapefruity, pungenty citrus there. It sits kind of on top. It sits in that border region between the thicker. So you've got like thick yeasty notes on the back third of your palate, and as you can feel the thickness drops away a little bit on the border region, and then you get more of it. But in this wee border region, it does feel like the beer has just a little bit of an almost kind of grapefruity, citrusy pungency to it, which is interesting. Yeah, really unusual that actually. I've never really noticed that with Kveik beers before, and to be honest, this is a style that I need to kind of explore a little bit more, because it's one that I'm not overly familiar with. I do like them, but I'm just not overly familiar with them, in fairness. But yeah, it's a lot. The more that I drink of this beer, the more that I like it. I think that's definitely fair to say. It's just really interesting how that kind of all comes together. In the very centre of your palate, you will notice that on top of that yeasty note, there is a wee bit of a butter candy, Werther's Original sort of thing, and it gets a little bit more. It does get a wee bit more kind of how would you say? It does develop a little bit more of a kind of fruity note in the middle of the palate as well. You will get wee bits of like, it's got a wee bit of I actually do get a wee bit of a stronger passion fruity note in the middle of the palate too, which is unusual. There's a bit of the kind of mangoey, apricot, papaya type things. The yeast is contributing a lot to the fruity side of this beer, which is interesting, and it's just weird to get those fruits in the middle of the palate. That's what really is unusual about these Kveik beers for me. But yeah, I think that sort of covers the malty and yeasty side of this beer quite well, actually. So yeah, onto the hoppy side of things then. Back corners of the palate, there is a wee bit of earthiness there, and as you move further forward, the earthiness does spread forward a little bit. It's a little bit herbal. Then as you reach the kind of front corners of the palate, it's definitely a little bit more kind of big and floral and aromatic in a lot of ways. So yeah, I really like how that goes together in this one for sure. So yeah, you've got a nice big, we do get a nice bit of a kind of bigger floral aromatic note on the front corners of the palate. Then round the front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and a little bit more kind of grassy in a sense as well. But yeah, it's the grassiness does have a wee bit of zestiness to it on the front of the palate as well. I would definitely say that, and that's definitely an interesting point to make about this beer. But the hoppy side of the beer does seem a little bit straight up. And what I would say about this one is the hoppiness does develop a little bit of spiciness. So I wonder if there's a bit of Columbus in here as a bittering hop. I do think there might be a bit of that in this one. So Columbus always gives you that distinctive spiciness, and remember, bittering hops are when you in the early part of the wort boil, that's when you add your bittering hops. The earlier on in the wort boil that you add the hops, the more likely you are to get bitterness from them, and as you go through the wort boil, you get that trade-off in flavour of bitterness towards more flavour and aroma and things like that. So yeah, bear that in mind with this one for sure. But yeah, let's focus on that front third of the tongue then. So again, as you go to that border region between front and middle third of your palate, you get a little bit of a kind of, you can feel a bit of a bread crusty note. Then there's a bit of a kind of pungenty citrus kind of sitting on top of it, and then forming the baseline of that front third of your palate, again you get some of these nice, slightly thicker yeasty components coming out of the beer. But yeah, if you go to the back of that kind of front third of your palate. There's definitely a wee bit of a kind of stronger passion fruity note there, and you can feel some softer, there's maybe a wee bit of mango in there as well. Definitely get a little bit of that coming out of this one, but then as you move to the front half of that front third of your tongue, it is more of a kind of oily, kind of orangey note for me. I do think there's mosaic in this. I wouldn't be surprised if the hops in this beer were, it was, I wouldn't be surprised if it was Azaka and Columbus, or if it was Mosaic and Columbus. I think it's one of the, it could be something along these lines. So yeah, I do like how that goes together in this one for sure. This is a really, really nicely executed beer in that sense. Yeah, the fruity side, both from the yeast and from the hops, goes together very, very well. And this is one that I need to kind of think and ponder over a little bit. It's, as I say, I'm not overly experienced with the Kveik IPAs, but this one certainly does leave a good impression. So I'd like to see a few more of these from Stigbergets. You know, a double Kveik IPA could be an interesting thing from these guys. But I do remember that these beers do give you a wee bit of gas almost. But yeah, this is a nicely executed beer from Stigbergets once again. So it gets a thumbs up from me. So if you do happen to come across this one, it is definitely worth checking out for something a little bit different. But yeah, let's leave it at that for the tasting side of things, and we'll round off the review with the mouthfeel then. You know, it's a mid-bodied beer. Carbonation is very, very smooth. It's got a nice wetness to it, but at the same time, it's a wee bit oily. So I can appreciate that about this one, definitely. It has got a nice little bit of an oily character to it for sure. But yeah, it's a really, I think it's, again, as I say, it's a well executed beer, this one, no doubt in my mind about that. So yeah, what else can we say? So I would say mid-bodied, smooth carbonation, little touch of oiliness to it. In terms of hoppy bitterness, I think this one's got about 30ish, maybe 40 IBUs. It feels like it's a little bit more bitter. Maybe the Columbus is a little bit higher in this one, just to kind of balance it out. So I'd say maybe 40 IBUs. This does feel a little bit more bitter, in fairness, but it could well just be the contrast with the yeasty side of things. Wee touch of sweetness in the malt base, but you know, overall it's just a big smooth kind of thick thing. Then you've got some nice juicy and very slightly oily fruits coming out of this one. So yeah, this is a really interesting beer, and I'm glad that I was able to review this one for you. I usually enjoy the beers that I review anyway, but I think this has been a particularly interesting one to take a look at. So yeah, let's leave it at that for this review. I've enjoyed this one. So yeah, this one was the Syndafloden, the flood, basically, to translate the word into English. A Kveik IPA, 6% ABV from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Ringen in Gothenburg. Really enjoyed this, and I hope you guys enjoyed my take on it as well. This is a beer that's made me think a little bit. Quite a few of the Stigbergets beers I've had in recent times have been a little bit more straight up, obviously the Rauch beer aside, but yeah, it's nice to see them do something a bit different. I just wish I'd been able to get a hold of the Amazing Blaze and the black IPA that they did, but this was a nice beer to try, so I hope you guys enjoyed the video, as I said. But yeah, thank you again for watching. As I always say, check out my social media, check out my other Stigbergets reviews if you're interested. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Stigbergets, and let me know if you've had any other interesting styles from these guys actually as well. That would be interesting to hear. But yeah, thank you again for watching. This one was the Syndafloden 6% Kveik IPA from Stigbergets Bryggeri in Ringen up in Gothenburg on the Swedish west coast. Slange, skål, cheers, and catch you guys very, very soon.